Good morning and welcome to today's social equity education session. My name is Jackie and I'm a social equity representative with the Cannabis Regulatory Agency. Today I'd like to welcome Harry Barish, Director of Real Estate with CLG Realty Advisors, and Jelani Karamoko, attorney with the Cannabis Legal Group, as they discuss cannabis real estate. Harry and Jelani bring a unique perspective as they combine knowledge from both cannabis commercial real estate and cannabis law. Following the presentation, they will be sticking around for Q&A. So feel free to ask your questions as you think of them during the presentation. And you can do so by typing them out in the Q&A box that you see on the bottom of your screen. So Harry and Jelani, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Again, my name is attorney Jelani Karamoko. I am a real estate attorney here at Cannabis Legal Group. We'll be starting off with a presentation on real estate property interest for licensing, and then I'll hand it over to Harry to talk more about the real estate and cannabis industry. So in today's presentation, we're going to highlight real estate property interests that are necessary for licensing purposes. Being able to secure real estate is a necessary part of your both your state application and also your municipal application to be licensed for a cannabis business. So being able to acquire the real estate interest that you need to complete your licensing and application is very important. So we'll touch on 3 different types of real estate interest for licensing purposes. And as Jackie mentioned, I'll go over any questions at the end of the presentation. So to start, a licensee does not have to own the property to get licensed by the state or local municipality. Oftentimes, owning real estate is kind of the first real estate interest that comes to mind. Certainly, if you're in a position to purchase property in a hot real estate market, owning the real estate is certainly one option, but it is not the only option. You do not have to actually own the property in order to get licensed. Leases and land contracts are 2 real estate interests that are equally effective for licensing. And we'll discuss some general best practices for acquiring property through real estate ownership or using a lease agreement or land contract for your real estate interest for your license. So first we'll start with some best practices for your real estate lease. A real estate owner can participate in the cannabis industry through a real estate lease without being subject to the state disclosure requirements as part of your pre-qualification application. So that's an advantage for you as a licensee, that you can secure property through a lease agreement. And the benefit is that the owner of the property or your future landlord may have some concerns about having to disclose their information or their personal information as part of your pre-qualification application with the state, but that is actually not required. The real estate owner is not subject to the same disclosure requirements, and so it may make negotiating and approaching property owners easier to say, we can negotiate a lease agreement, you can participate in a growing industry as a landlord without being subject to the same disclosure requirements as the business licensee. So that may be a benefit for you. It's important to understand the rent obligation under the lease agreement. There may be a gross rent obligation for you to pay as the tenant and business licensee. The lease agreement rent may be calculated on a percentage basis, where based on your gross sales or net income, usually calculated on a monthly basis, a certain percentage of your sales or net income for that month is rent to the landlord. Or you could also have net rent provisions, which essentially state that in addition to you paying a certain rent amount to the landlord each month, you are also responsible for the maintenance and repair obligations for the property. So it's very important to understand under your lease agreement, what type of rent obligation do you have? It's important for the tenant to do an inspection of the premises before signing a lease. We'll talk more about that shortly. You want to be able to inspect the property to determine what maintenance or repair obligations will be necessary. In a net lease, again, the tenant is going to be responsible for those repair and maintenance obligations. Under a gross lease, most of those repair and maintenance obligations are going to be fall on the landlord. So depending on the type of rent obligation you have, whatever those maintenance and repair obligations will be determined to the landlord or the tenant. But in either case, you want to understand what type of maintenance, what type of repair is this property going to require in order for me to operate. So we highly recommend you do an inspection before signing any lease agreement. Next, we'll talk about land contracts, which is another type of real estate interest that you can use for your cannabis business license. A land contract is both a financing instrument and an agreement for the sale of property. So it's important to understand the nature of a land contract. Generally, under a land contract, the purchase price is paid in installments. Usually those installments are done on a monthly or an annual basis. The legal requirements for a land contract are very limited. A land contract legally only has to describe the property, the person's bound by the land contract, the payment terms or the installment terms, and the signature of the party. So that's a very short amount of information, but you need to take the next step to really make sure you're protected as a land contract buyer or seller if you're going to use a land contract as your real estate interest. As a land contract buyer, the land contract buyer should require that the land contract seller obtain a title commitment and a title policy before entering into the land contract. That title commitment and title policy will protect you as a buyer so that you can know if there are any other interests, any other liens against the property. The title commitment will disclose any delinquent taxes on the property or any other interest that may interfere with your completion of the land contract and your full ownership of the property after those installments have been paid. So I would recommend that as the best practice. The land contract should also specify the date of possession. That is a negotiated part of the land contract. So it's something that the land contract seller or the land contract buyer both should negotiate and reach an agreement on. Oftentimes, possession will be transferred at closing on the date of the first installment payment, but the parties are also free to negotiate a different date of possession. But it's important for you to understand when you actually take control and possession of the property under your land contract. Once all land contract payments have been made, the land contract seller is obligated to convey the property to the land contract buyer under state law. If you follow the recommendation of involving a title company as part of your land contract closing, you will have a warranty deed available from the title company based on the title commitment and the title policy that they provided. And once the land contract payments have been completed, that warranty deed that is held in escrow by the title company will be released to you as the buyer. So it gives you some additional protection that this warranty deed is guaranteeing your full title to the property after you've made your land contract payments in full. And then that deed will be released to you from the title company immediately or shortly after that last payment is made, which may help you avoid any disputes or difficulties in contacting the land contract seller to then get them to execute the deed that you're entitled to. So if you obtain a title commitment and a title policy and have that future warranty deed held in escrow, it's a way to protect yourself as a buyer and also to protect the land contract seller to kind of streamline the completion of the land contract and the conveyance of the property that you will be entitled to after you make the installment payment. Next, we'll talk about if you're ready to just purchase the property. So if you are in that position, we would suggest that you first negotiate a purchase agreement. That purchase agreement is going to protect you as a buyer. It will also have some protections for the seller, but that purchase agreement is going to provide you an opportunity to do due diligence, property inspections, and title examination on the property. The purchase condition can also include closing conditions that are necessary for your licensing approval prior to you completing the acquisition of the property. So you can be creative in the provisions of the purchase agreement to make sure that you're only obligated to purchase the property after you've received either a state or a municipal approval. Those can be included as one of the closing conditions of the property, so that you become approved and licensed prior to completing the acquisition of the property. You can also include municipal application deadlines as another closing condition, which is a protection for the seller. Oftentimes, the seller wants to make sure that the buyer or proposed buyer is truly serious. And they're really serious about following through on acquiring the property, submitting their state or local municipal application as needed. And this isn't someone who's just tying up the property without seriously moving forward with a cannabis business. So you can also include municipal application deadlines for the buyer to submit their municipal application for approval to ensure that they're dealing with a serious buyer. You can also include provisions that once the buyer has been approved at the state or municipal level, that the seller is obligated to submit a change of ownership form within a short period of time to ensure that the seller is moving forward and doing the steps necessary to complete the purchase and potentially transfer a municipal license if that is available for the property. So definitely a purchase agreement is where you want to start if you're purchasing property. And keep in mind that you can be creative in those provisions, and it may be helpful to you to receive your local estate approval before being obligated to pay the purchase price. And lastly, just want to touch on some additional areas of due diligence if you're acquiring real estate. Again, it's important to use a title company to confirm the record property owner, any liens or other interest in the property. It's important to investigate the current condition of the property, especially for its ability to receive a municipal certificate of compliance or certificate of occupancy. You really want to have a good understanding of what is it going to take for the municipality to grant me a certificate of use or a certificate of occupancy for this property. Is it going to require a lot of work? Is it going to require cosmetic work? Is there a previous certificate of use or certificate of occupancy that's already been granted that I just need to follow up with the municipality and make sure that it will be current or be updated for this year or a future year? And that's really important because a lot of the municipalities that we see require that a property have a certificate of compliance or a certificate of use in order to become a operating licensed business in that municipality. Some municipalities, if they have a competitive scoring criteria, they may award certain points for having a certificate of occupancy in place. Other municipalities will make it a strict requirement that you have a certificate of occupancy for the property before they grant you a municipal license. So as part of your due diligence, you really want to understand what is the condition of this property and how close or how far away is the condition from being qualified for a certificate of use or certificate of occupancy. Also important to research any public records you can. regarding the property. That's something that certainly an attorney or a law office can assist you with, to make sure you have a good understanding of any delinquent taxes, any tax delinquencies filed on the property. You are sure of the zoning status of the property. Oftentimes, municipalities require that the property be industrially zoned. That varies depending on the location, but the zoning status of the property is very critical to understand. Also, some municipalities will restrict you from being licensed if there are outstanding blight tickets, fines, or assessments on the property. So even if the taxes have been paid, even if the property is properly zoned, if you have outstanding correction orders, outstanding blight tickets, outstanding fines from the local municipality, those are all reasons why you could be denied a municipal license. So you really want to make sure you've done a search of your public records, so you have an understanding of any issues that may be out there that may prevent you from receiving a municipal local license. If your property that you're acquiring also has a municipal license, a previous municipal cannabis license approved for the property, it's important to check the municipal license expiration date, because oftentimes if your intention is to transfer that license to yourself, many municipalities will require that the transfer occur prior to the expiration date of the municipal license. And we have had cases where buyers thought they were going to acquire the property and acquire a cannabis license. That was part of the purchase price that they were willing to pay, and then find out later that actually the municipal business cannabis license is not eligible to be transferred anymore because it's expired, and the seller did not renew it. So that may change your interest in the property or the price you may be willing to pay. So it's important to just check that detail. What is the municipal license expiration date, and what are the license transfer requirements for that municipality? Lastly, also want to be sure of any local buffer distance requirements from schools, churches, or other cannabis businesses. That will vary by location, and then also the zoning status requirements will vary by municipality. Generally, you will find that industrial zone properties are required for cannabis business, but again, that varies based on the municipality. So those are some other due diligence items that you want to be sure that you investigate prior to acquiring real estate. And from there, I will turn it over to Harry to talk more about the cannabis industry.
Thanks, Jelani. Yeah, my name is Harry Barish. I'm a cannabis broker with CLG Realty Advisors. It is a sister company of the Cannabis Legal Group, and I'm not an attorney, but I am surrounded by a lot of attorneys. I've been doing commercial real estate for the past 20 plus years. I specialized in retail, so I basically parlayed my real estate background and with my passion for the cannabis industry, and combined them and turned that into a CLG Realty Advisors with Barton Morris, who is the principal owner of the Cannabis Legal Group. So a little bit about me. So in terms of real estate, just kind of touching on some of the points that Jelani made. In terms of social equity recipients, there's obviously discounts and fees, and in some cases, and in some municipalities, a discount perhaps in real estate opportunities that are owned by those municipalities. And we touched on the several different types of transactions. There are leases, of course, and there are purchases. With leasing, what that will do is that obviously frees up your capital. to invest in your core business, whatever that business may be. And if you can get a lease that is somewhat undervalued, perhaps, or under market, that always has greater value. That has greater value, perhaps, than maybe even owning a building. However, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. As far as owning a building, most cannabis green zone properties that are licensed, in the past anyway, and certainly still a little bit, not as much in the future, have always been sold at least at a premium, at above market valuations, especially the retail side of things. And that's not going to change, anytime soon. The values definitely have gone down for retail, and not nearly as much as the value of real estate that has, perhaps started to taper off on the industrial side of things for the processors and cultivators. And then, of course, you have the consumption lounges that are now, you're starting to see pop up. There are two in the state that are licensed. One is open to the public, one's not. You're starting to see more micro businesses popping up, and now you have the micro business A license, which allows you to do 300 plants. So I believe there is probably going to be more interest in that license type. And then, of course, you have your secure transport and safety compliance, which, those, you might see one or maybe two a year in each one of those categories. But that market is kind of stabilized. And, obviously you also have to take into consideration when purchasing or getting involved in a real estate transaction, and is obviously capital, and making sure that you have enough capital to not only acquire the real estate, and in some cases may have to pay the land in full, as not every property owner is in a position to be able to offer a land contract, especially if they have a mortgage on the property. And so there could be some incentives for property owners to offer a land contract, in that they aren't going to get hit with their taxes all at one time, so they could essentially act as a bank and carry the paper and earn interest as well, for a period of time until there is a balloon payment, which most land contract holders are always looking for a balloon payment, typically in a 2 to 3 year period. And then, of course, you're going to have to pay a premium on that interest, because it's a land contract and this is a riskier industry. And then, the challenge, obviously, with acquiring real estate and or some sort of financing for real estate and or improvements is there's really there's really not a big source of financing in the finance world. And by finance world, I mean traditional banking. And you can kind of find it a little bit here and there with some credit unions, and you're starting to hear about some banks now that are lending money, but they're really only, if you ever hear about that, I believe Flagstar Bank actually was responsible for issuing the first traditional commercial loan in the country for cannabis. And they're really only issuing it to the larger players that have that are more well financed, and that are what they would consider to be a less risk in a risky industry, right? Because I think we all agree by now that this industry definitely has its share of risk as well. when buying real estate, the advantages of buying real estate, obviously, it definitely does create more value to your business. When you one day, would like to sell, trying to sell a business with a lease versus trying to sell a business without a lease, certainly can, look more attractive if you own the property. So, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Not everybody's capable of acquiring real estate, and if leasing is an option, I would certainly encourage people to lease just to get into the business. You got to remember, your primary business is the cannabis industry. It's not the real estate industry. So if you can't acquire the real estate, it's okay. So that's leasing versus purchasing. Now, as far as leasing goes, Jelani touched on some of these. I'll kind of I'll give you a little bit of a my spin in terms of, when you sign a gross deal, that typically includes taxes, insurance on the building, and any maintenance that there might be, and if there's any common area maintenance. But typically, the tenant is required to maintain, snow plow, cut the grass, those types of things. And then you have, the percentage rent deal that Jelani talked about, in terms of if an owner of a building wanted to participate in ownership of the business, that they could do that by way of a percentage rent, and not have to go through the background check and the licensing process. And then there's also the triple net deals, where the tenant is responsible for all the maintenance, the taxes on the property, and the insurance on the building. And that's pretty typical, really, in all real estate aspects, both the warehouse and the retail side of things. Most deals that, the landlord is typically responsible for, the roof, and the outer walls and the structural components of a building. And most times, because, the tenant makes all these improvements to the building, the tenant usually will be responsible for all upgrades, and any repairs that were part of those upgrades. So that's pretty standard in real estate. So just talking about purchase, you're a social equity recipient, you want to get in the industry, and where do I start? So obviously, I think the best place to start would be the municipalities that have ordinances that allow social equity recipients. Of course, we know, Detroit is one of those, as well as, many others, Flint and Battle Creek, I believe, and several other big cities. So, you have to decide what part of the business you want to be in, whether it's processing, cultivating, or retail, which are the predominant ones in the space. And start with the real estate search, and as Jelani mentioned, figure out what municipality you want to be in, figure out what their ordinance reads, also understand what the application looks like and the scoring system in that application, because oftentimes the sites score themselves, score certain points themselves, and you want to make sure that if you are entering a municipality that has a competitive process, that you understand the application and the point system. And of course, the buffers and where you can go and can't go. That's obviously key as well. And there's other ways to enter the industry other than new municipalities. You can also go into a municipality that is already existing that may have licenses available. You could potentially acquire a business that that could use a different ownership team. And then the thing about this industry, obviously, anybody who's paying any attention to what's happening, I'm sure understands that the business and the industry is facing some challenges in terms of saturation point and the value of flour, which is kind of the barometer of the industry. The price of flour obviously continues to decline, and profit margins in retail areas are continuing to decline, especially and that's area specific as well. So this industry, you're starting to see a lot of a change in this industry in terms of people now wanting to sell, and and the mergers and acquisitions market, the consolidations. You're starting to see some people closing shop. It's a tough industry. Be careful what you wish for. Make sure you have your due diligence. Make sure you do your due diligence. Make sure that you have your business plan in place, and make sure that you use realistic projections in those business plans. Social equity recipients are no different than really many other people in this industry, which is everybody needs to go out and get capital somehow. Very few people use all of their own capital to invest in this industry. So everybody has partners, everybody has investors, and social equity recipients are not going to be any different. So if you want to get a partner, if you want to get an investor, obviously, you as a social equity recipient has to have a game plan in place, and has to make that investor feel comfortable to want to invest in you, in your playbook.
CRA regarding social equity, which we are social equity, us and Kevin.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So, just make sure that you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and and make sure that you hire professionals that know what they're doing and that are in this industry, that specialize in this industry, because the industry changes very fast, and you kind of have to have your finger on the pulse and have a good understanding of what's happening in the marketplace. That's kind of pretty much touched on the highlights of going about looking at real estate, acquiring real estate, and the challenges and advantages and disadvantages. So that's with that, I'll pass it to Jackie.
All right, great. Thank you guys for that information. If you'd like to access this presentation at a later date, you will be able to find the recorded session on the CRA's website at michigan.gov/CRA within about a week. Before we break out into the Q&A, please take the next few minutes to answer the poll questions that you're about to see on your screen. You may also use the next few minutes to post any questions if you haven't done so already. So we're just going to give it a few minutes, and then we'll get started with the Q&A. Okay, I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. Okay, great. So we can go ahead and open up the floor for Q&A. So I am going to be reading the questions, and Harry and Jelani will answer them. So let's see here. Our first question is, can we get a copy of the presentation? No, I do know I mentioned beforehand where you can find it. It will be recorded. It is recorded and will be on our website. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
No.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, are there any websites that specifically have listings for cannabis buildings or properties?
There are a couple of websites that you know, they don't have the you know, they don't cover the entire market. You know, there's one called 420 Property that really seems to be the one that might have them, you know, more than others, I guess. You know, a lot of these deals, you know, are off-market deals that are not ever posted on a website. I would say probably more deals get done off-market than on market. So it's always good to have relationships with people that are in the real estate industry, because not everything's out there that you may be aware of. So, but there really are not that, you know, there's no authoritative website where you can kind of find, you know, everything that you're looking for.
All right. The next question is, what are the benefits of a land contract compared to other sales instruments?
Okay, well, I'll jump in here. If we're comparing a land contract to a real estate purchase, I believe that's the question. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but specifically benefits of a land contract. The main benefit is that you'll be paying the purchase price in installments compared to a real estate acquisition where you'll be paying the purchase price as a whole up front. And given the increase in real estate prices, if you're in a position to write $1 million check up front for a property and close for it through a real estate acquisition, you know, that's great. That's a tremendous position to be in. But if you're not in a position to write $1 million check up front, you may have the ability to still operate and locate your business there through a land contract and pay that $1 million in installments. So that would be a benefit of acquiring that property through a land contract. Your upfront cost will be lower because you'll be paying the purchase price in installments. Now, one of the downsides is that as a financing instrument, because again, a land contract is both a agreement to buy property, but also a financing instrument. As a land contract, the financing instrument nature of it does not get the same legal protections as other financing instruments, such as a mortgage. So if you were to acquire a property, and let's say you use a mortgage to help finance some portion of the purchase price, you have certain legal rights and protections under that mortgage, where if you default on that mortgage payment or you miss a payment, there are more protections in place for you under that mortgage as opposed to you missing a payment or you being delinquent on a payment under a land contract. So that's one of the disadvantages of a land contract. But to answer the question, in my opinion, the primary benefit will be lower upfront costs because you're paying that purchase price in installment.
Okay, so there's another question about land contracts. So who is responsible for fines and or addressing environmental issues while a land contract is in place?
Well, one of the things that, you don't really see as often in this industry is people doing, performing in their due diligence in environmental. And part of the reason why is because it doesn't require financing. So I would encourage everybody to get an environmental test done on their property during their due diligence. And with the end game of understanding that, if this goes, legal nationwide and the banks start opening it up to financing, you will need, the bank will need assurances that the property is, free and clear of any environmental contamination. So, the few $1,000s or whatever it might be that you spend now will certainly answer any concerns, and those, if there are concerns to be addressed, that should be addressed prior to closing. So it should never really be an issue after closing.
Yes, and just briefly, who is responsible under a land contract for environmental related issues? That's a negotiated point. If you remember, we talked about there are pretty short legal requirements, strict legal requirements for a land contract. So who is responsible for any environmental issues will fall under that is a point to be negotiated with the land contract with the property owner. Similar to the date of possession. That's a point that you need to be aware of and have a specific negotiation and agreement with the property owner regarding, because there is no strict legal rule for either party under a land contract. So that's something that you or your counsel will definitely want to investigate, as Harry suggested, and then make sure that's clearly stated in your land contract.
And one other thing about environmentals is, a seller, it's always okay. It's okay to ask if there has been an environmental done on the property. There could have been one done in the past, 5 years. If you're looking at a gas station or a oil change place or an auto repair facility, that's kind of, a potential, environmental issue there. Now, if you are kind of, just kind of in the, looking at a former restaurant or something like that, that might not have, the same potential of having a contamination issue. So, in most cases, a seller will have to disclose if they are aware of any any environmental issues, but a buyer should always perform that in their due diligence. That's usually that's the buyer's responsibility.
Okay, great. So the next question is title insurance suggested for all property sales?
I would suggest it, yes, especially as the buyer. It's insurance that's for your protection. You'll also discover more information about the property by going through the title insurance process. So yes, I would highly recommend it.
All right, and I know one was mentioned before, but this next question says, can you provide any financial institutions or where to find those that participate and offer financing for cannabis properties?
I would suggest reaching out to community to credit unions. Those seem to be where, if there is some funding, it's usually through the credit union channels. I know Community Choice is rolling out a program. I believe not Citizens Bank, but there's a credit union called Citizens I believe in Royal Oak that is starting to get into the lending industry for cannabis. But I would really focus on the on the credit union side of the world to see what types of opportunities might exist. And once you start getting outside of that, you're going to be looking at a much higher interest rate. If it's private equity, if it's, but sometimes that's your only choice. And that's the cannabis tax, if you will.
Okay, so we only have a few more minutes, but there's two questions that I'm going to get to here. So one is, can you explain how sale and leaseback arrangements work?
So sale leaseback, basically, I own a building, I occupy the building, and I am interested in selling the building with me as a tenant in the building. So me, the tenant, signs a lease based on an agreed upon rental rate for an agreed upon amount of time. And then that is sold as an investment property to another party at a certain rate of return that is consistent with the cannabis industry. So for example, the cannabis industry cap rates are just like cap rates on any real estate investment. The stronger the name, the stronger the signator, the stronger the guarantee on the lease, and the longer primary term that you have on the lease, you can sell it at a lower cap rate, which means a higher dollar amount. So for example, let's just take Starbucks. Starbucks trades at a 5% cap rate, or sometimes even a below 5% cap rate. So the cannabis industry can trade anywhere from 8% cap rate to a 15% cap rate, just because of the nature of the industry. And so if you wanted, if you had a 3,000 square foot building and you wanted to pay $3,000 a month in rent, just I'm using round numbers and hypothetical numbers, at a 10% cap rate, you're putting a value of $3,000 a month or $36,000 a year. You're putting a value on that at $360,000 at a 10% cap rate. So that's how the sale leaseback works. It's based on what you want to pay in rent and how long it's going to take for that investor to get that money back, based on a rate of return that is consistent with the cannabis industry.
Okay, so the last question is, how can we get in touch with you after today's presentation? And I have put the phone number and email address from the website. And I can also put the email or the website link in the chat if that's okay, or if you want to provide it, in another way.
Yeah, you can get a hold of me at Harry at CLG-Realty.com. Or check out our website, CLGRealtyAdvisors.com.
And I just put that in the chat for everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just adding, excuse me, I just added my email address to the chat as well.
Thank you. Okay, so that's all the questions we have time for today. Thank you, Harry and Jelani, for participating in the social equity education session. And thank you for all the viewers for joining us. We appreciate your participation and hope that the information presented continues to be beneficial. Please check out our website for upcoming sessions with industry professionals on an array of topics. And have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks.